All right, everyone. In this video, I'm going to go over the instructions for this outline and my recommended steps that I posted on Canvas for you. And to do this, I'm going to use the template and a random example to kind of show you the process that I think is the most efficient way to get this done without having to go back and revise quite so much the second time, and to make sure that you have enough information in there. And so the first steps that you should do, everyone should do, is read the discussion feedback that I provided on your brainstorming discussion for your subtopics this week. Essentially, I'm going to either tell you that any of your ideas or all of your ideas are good and you can use any of the subtopics you want, or more likely, I'm going to suggest specific subtopics for you to use based on the ideas that you have. And so you need to go ahead and look at that early on in the week. As soon as that pops up, feedback will all be back today. So that if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask me and get them answered before you dive into this outline. The second step that you need to do is view and organize all the materials. And so I'm actually going to go through each of these steps one by one with an example paper and subtopics. And so the example that I'm going to use for this video is I decided to do my literature review on the effects of mindset on learning in elementary school. So the way that children view their intelligence, whether it's fixed or whether it's flexible and can be increased, typically has a very big effect on learning. So my specific research topic is going to look at this effect specifically in elementary school children. And so let's say out of the subtopics I suggested, that I've gone back and reviewed my feedback, and the subtopics that I've ended up with after reviewing that feedback are, I'm going to have one subtopic or one supporting section that looks at the effects of mindset on learning math and science. And then I'll have another supporting section or subtopic that looks at the effects of mindset on writing. And so this would have evolved out of me looking at my articles and seeing that I've got all these articles that look at the effects of mindset on learning, but I noticed that some of my articles measure learning in arithmetic or math or science fields, and then my other studies looked at different types of learning in language arts or writing. So I decided to separate my studies into those two groups. So I've got these two subtopics. Now that I've got these subtopics, I can go ahead and start organizing all of my materials and getting ready to start filling out the template of my outline. So you want to have all 6 of your articles handy. If it's at all possible to print them, you really should print them. It makes the process so much easier. You know, you can mark on the pages. You don't have to switch back and forth between a number of windows on your computer. If at all possible, get them printed. And there's also examples of outlines and literature reviews. These instructions are in the module, the rubric. And so you need to get everything out and organized before you start, because it's going to end up being a lot of information that you're dealing with as you're putting this outline together. After you are all ready to go, we can go ahead and start by filling in the major sections of the template I provided. And so I've bolded some sections of the template, and I've made other sections in the template blue. So give me one second. I'm going to move over to the template now so that we can see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so you see these large, like level 1 headers here are bolded. So I have my introduction, my supporting section A, or my subtopic 1, my supporting section B, subtopic 2. If you happen to have come up with 3 supporting sections, or I suggested 3 supporting sections, then you would add another supporting section here. If you only have 2, then you can just delete that and get rid of it, and the concluding section. And so these bolded parts right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, are going to end up being the headers on your paper. And so let me show you real quick with a paper so you can get an idea for what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's one of the example papers. Okay, and so this is the introduction. It's got tabbed up. And so for APA style, the introduction line doesn't get a bold, but then you see, so this is the supporting section 1. And so that bolded header in the outline is actually going to turn into a bolded header in your paper. Everything that is in that supporting section will go here. And then you see we have the second supporting section here. And I think this one only had 2 in the conclusion. Okay, so you can see how the bolded headers in the outline template are going to directly translate to the bolded headers and thus the sections that are in your actual paper. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and fill in these bolded headers. And so the introduction, really this is just going to be the title of your paper, or for right now you can just put your topic. So my topic is the effect of mindset on learning in an elementary school. And so specific formatting for this isn't really important. You'll see that I'm giving this proper capitalization, but things like that at this point aren't important. I do encourage you to have these large numbered sections bolded to keep them bolded from the template so that it's clear what the sections of your paper are. Okay, so that's my topic. That's going to be my first bolded section. My second bolded section is going to be my first subtopic. And so again, that was the effect of mindset specifically on learning math or science. And so I'm going to fill that in here. All right, and then my second supporting section that I came up with was the effects of writing in language arts. All righty, and then I don't have a third supporting section, so I'm going to get rid of that right there. And the conclusion section can just stay, I'm going to put conclusion actually, because that's what we'll call it in APA style. Okay, so that was pretty quick. Now that I've already decided my subtopics, I've already filled in the main sections and headers of my paper. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to identify any terms that we're going to need to discuss or introduce to people, and also go ahead and put the citation for the studies where they go so that I know what study is going to be discussed in what context. So first, let's think about this introduction. I'm putting these here now because as you go through all of your papers, if you come upon a good description of one of these terms, you can go ahead and insert it into this part of the outline. So it's good to know ahead of time what definitions or descriptions or explanations you should be looking out for that might help in your introduction. And so for this paper, you want to think, what is a term that an ordinary person would not know? And so when we think about ordinary people, if we want to speak to a wide audience, you know, a lot of the adult population really doesn't read over the 5th grade level. And so we really want to shoot to make this as approachable and easy for everyone to understand. I'd rather explain a term or a concept that someone already knows than not explain something and have the reader confused and lost. So for this paper, what I would want to explain is I would need to explain mindset. And there's 2 types of mindsets, actually. There's the fixed mindset, and then there's the ideal one, the growth mindset. And also, because maybe elementary school, you know, differs in some regions, I'm going to kind of put in a description here for what do I mean by elementary school. That's going to consider, you know, grades 1 through 5, or really whatever the studies consider elementary school as. And so we want these definitions to line up with how your studies are defining them. If your studies define these in different ways, then that's kind of an important thing to note, and you can put multiple descriptions down there, okay? So I've got these general terms I need to look out for as I'm going through my studies in here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to put my study citations where they go in the paper so that I know kind of what the conversation that study is going to go in. And so let's say I have one study, just come up with, you know, a random one of my studies, Oliver et al., that goes here because it measures the effects of a fixed or a growth mindset on learning arithmetic. Okay, say I have another study that'll fall under this section that looks at a similar thing, also looking at learning in math. Okay. So I'm just putting random citations in here for example purposes. Really, we're just trying to make sure that we know where the discussion of each study is going to go. Okay, and let's say I have, another study, and so you keep going in that manner. Okay, so I have 3 studies that fall under this section, meaning I have 3 studies that have results that tell us something about the effects of mindset on learning math. Okay. Now I have the second section. So let's say I've only got, 2 studies that look at the effects of mindset on learning to write. So I'm just going to put some random examples down here. Schwam looks at that. Say I have another one, it's a little bit older, that has results that look at, so the study in some way measures the effects of mindset on writing, and there will be results on that I can discuss in this section. Okay, so that is why the study would fall into this section. And let's say I have one more, because really we're supposed to have 6. Okay, and so for the meantime, I'm not being very anal about my in-text citations. Really, these are, when we write the paper, you can go back and make sure that they're, formatted exactly right and that I'm including all of the authors and such. And so if you do that now, make the in-text citations perfectly formatted now, that's less work that you have to do later. But right now, it's just important that we know exactly what article we're talking about, and we know exactly where all of the information came from. We don't want to end up with any information in the paper that's in there without a citation, and then we say, well, dang, I don't remember where I got that information from. Because then you're going to have to go back and find it. You can't leave anything uncited. Okay. So I've filled out the major heading sections of my paper. I know what the sections are, and I know what section each article falls under. So let's go on to the next step of this process that I've conceptualized. It's filling in the content of each major section of the template. And so what you want to do is where you put each article in each section, you want to summarize each study somewhat like you did in your annotated bibliographies. It's going to be a little bit shorter. Annotated bibliographies were a little bit longer. We were practicing paraphrasing and pulling out all the relevant information. And so this might be a little bit shorter, but it's better to err on the side of putting more information about these studies in there than to err on the side of being too brief, okay? Because it'll be really easy to say, oh, you know what, we don't need this sentence and delete it, or, we don't need this information and delete it. That only takes 2 seconds. Whereas to go back and find specific information that you're missing and add it back in later on is going to take a lot more time. And so it's better to err on the side of having perhaps more information than you need and tidying it up and deleting it than not putting enough information. And so what's going to be relevant for each one of these studies? Go back to this template. Okay, so let's start with this first example. So this Oliver et al. Paper, let's suppose that it measures the effects of encouraging a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset on learning arithmetic tables over the course of 2nd grade or something, okay? And so what I want to do is, remember, this is going to be in like a coherent conversation and story or narrative in this paper. And so I want to start by kind of introducing this study. So I could say Oliver et al. Let's just say on students' math learning over the course of 3 months. Okay, so I kind of gave a general introduction or purpose. I could have said, you know, a number of things here. And then the method, you know, you want to go into kind of rather specifically what the methods are. And again, this will be some practice knowing what details are important and what details aren't important. But it's important to be able to compare the methods that each study did, because how the methods differ has some important implications for results. If 2 studies had pretty different methods but they got the same results, that means that those results are pretty generalizable. But if 2 studies had different results, then their methods being different might be able to explain that. And so that's some of the types of conversations that we'll be having in the conclusions of these subsections and of the final paper. And so the level of detail that might be appropriate for this was that, you know, I could say, so they can either be assigned to a I could say okay, and so this is a couple sentences, and what I can do later when I go back is I can break this down into more outline format and kind of give this information from different levels. But for right now, I'm just filling in this template, and so I would be doing this as I go through this paper. And so I'm reading through this paper, filling out the template, then I need to go and say specifically what the results are. Now remember, the results are very different than the conclusions. The results are what the actual measures and the statistical analysis turned out to be. Okay, so that's when those p-values come in and statistical difference. Was there, so for this one, it would be really important to know whether there was a statistical difference between the group that got the growth priming or in the group that got the fixed priming. So results indicated significant difference, which means that the p-value would be less than 0.05, right? Meaning that the difference that we found is definitely not due to error. So the results indicated significant differences in the math scores for students in the okay, so saying there's a difference, that's important, and saying that it's statistically significant, that's important. But also, it would be really important to know what the difference was, okay? So you don't want to be vague. The whole point of these papers is to give your readers the findings of these studies. So if you give us one really vague line about the results that's not really informative, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of doing the rest, of explaining the rest of the study. So what would be important to know here is that students in the growth had average scores that were 20% higher. And so I would get this from the results section. They would provide you with this information and the results, or some other type of descriptive information. What they'll do is they'll tell you if there is a difference, and then they'll more specifically explain what that difference was. Okay, and then I can give any other relevant information that's there. Importantly, in this example, I'm explaining a statistical difference, okay? If your study didn't find, if the difference wasn't statistically significant, or there wasn't a difference at all, or they proved their null hypothesis to be right, to be true, that's totally fine. That's also informative for the reader and for us to know that mindset training didn't really have an effect on math learning, okay? And so it's not that you need to explain only the differences. You need to explain all of the findings that are relevant to this section. So any results or findings that this paper has that's relevant to the effects of mindset on math and science learning, I need to put in here. But say that this Oliver et al. Paper also took measures, and they also measured students' final grades on history scores or something, okay? And so they gave them this priming, and then they measured the effects on math and history scores. This section is not on history. So if I start presenting results on some other topic or on something that's not directly relevant to the subsection, you're going to really confuse your reader. We need specific conversations in here. In this section, I'm literally only going to tell them about the effects of mindset on math and science learning, nothing else. And so I only want to report the conclusions that are relevant to that, and I want to report all of their results and conclusions that are relevant to that. And so this is what the results would look like as you're describing it in a paper. The conclusions, again, are different. The results are how the statistical analysis turned out, if there were differences, if they were statistically different, and if there were differences, what did they look like? Who was higher, who was lower, by how much, etc. The conclusions from that are different. The conclusions are really interpretations for what the researchers think those results mean. And so you want to include the conclusions in there or implications in there as well. So, the researchers I can't spell today. Okay, so that would be a conclusion. So I'll get rid of that one. Okay, so that is essentially the summary of this study and this subsection. This study fell under this subtopic. I went through, I briefly put into context what the study looked at, what were they doing, how did they do it, that method is important, what were the specific results that are relevant to this subsection, and then what kind of conclusions or implications did the researchers draw, what do those results mean, and why are they important, okay? You'll notice that I didn't put the in-text citation after each bit of this information. You could, that won't, having too many in-text citations, not a bad thing, but because of the way I have this organized in the outline, I can tell that all of these bullets are from this subtitle here. From this reference here, okay? If I had them all on the same level, it wouldn't be as obvious. Because of the way that I've organized it, it's clear to me at least, and that's what's important, or to you also, that all of this information came from this article, okay? If it's less clear to you or you're a little nervous, then just put, the in-text citation again after the piece of information. It's better to have too much than too little. So what I would do is I would continue on going through my article in that same manner, filling in the content in my supporting sections for as many articles as I have in that section. Again, another thing you want to be doing as you're spending the time to go through these articles each article is that while you're in there, you want to pull out relevant information that they might have in their introduction or discussion section that you can then use in your introduction and your discussion section. And so again, remember we had highlighted these terms earlier that we wanted to explain or describe in the beginning. And so say, you know, that paper I just did, the Oliver et al. Paper, had a good description of definition of mindset. And so I could just paraphrase it here, and then I would cite it so that I know where it came from. You might have another paper that has like a slightly different definition, and you can go ahead and put that in there as well. And then once we do the paper, it'll be easy to put those all together. Also say that there's some interesting background information in the introduction of that study too, or some kind of statistic that really grabs you, or something that you think would be helpful for introducing the beginning of your paper. Put it in here, paraphrase it, and then cite it, okay? And so this is just where you can start dropping information that'll work into your introduction. And also, it'll be helpful to find information to go in your conclusion as well. And so we'll really polish up this conclusion section once you've finished your outline and you have a good idea for what the actual conclusions are that we can draw. But for right now, there's some things that you can take out of your papers as you're going through them. One are directions for future research. And so every single article is going to provide recommendations for this at the end of their discussion section. So essentially at the end of the paper, usually they're in like the last 3, 2, or like even the very last paragraph in the entire paper. They're near where the limitations usually are. And so the idea for doing a literature review, if you remember the aims and the purposes that we reviewed last week, is to present a problem, explain to the reader all of the research on that problem, and let them know everything that we know about that issue up to now. And then at the end of these reviews, one of the major points is to say, this is the problem, this is everything that we know about this, and now people should work to X, Y, and Z, okay? And so your papers are probably going to make better recommendations than you are. And so it's great and easier for you to go into the paper, find a recommendation that they've made that's relevant to your paper, and paraphrase it and cite it here, okay? So you could just, you know, throw a couple in here. So maybe, you know, one of your papers suggests that they should investigate differences in mindset priming across genders, because no one's ever done that before. And then, you know, I could, since that wasn't my idea, I could just take it from the study and then cite it. Okay. The reason that you don't necessarily want to provide your own suggestions is that a lot of the time, the people that have written these papers have read all of the literature that's on that topic. You're only reading 6 articles, okay? And so you're not going to have read everything on it. And so often what happens is you're going to make a suggestion for something that's already out there, for something that someone's already done, okay? And so really we want to just borrow these suggestions for future research from the people, the authors of our articles that have read every single little piece of information on that. They're going to be the best expert opinion to go to. Okay, as far as the conclusions, you can pull those out of your papers also, or you can just try to draw some of your own conclusions after you're done with the outline. Again, I usually like to do this part last, because you have to have all the information and, you know, have wrapped your head around it before you can draw conclusions from it, right? So you can just go ahead and do that last, but you should, as you're going through your papers, pull out some suggestions for future research if you have them. And so I walked you through how to do one of these studies and also putting stuff from that study into these sections. And so you would continue on in the same way for all of your subtopics. Once we start writing the paper, what you'll do is you'll just turn this outline into paragraphs, and we'll add in some transition sentences and some ways to connect and relate these studies together. At the end of each subsection or subtopic, you should try to pull some general conclusions from your study. So after you've discussed all of the studies in here, you say, okay, from these 3 studies, what do we know about the effects of mindset on math and science learning? Okay, if all of the studies agreed and found the same thing, then you would want to say that. If they kind of disagreed and had different results, some found effects and some didn't, then you would want to point that out. But really, just a sentence or 2 summing up this subtopic, providing some general recommendations so that you don't literally just stop at the end of a study and then go to a whole new section, right? And so, again, these are things that we can tidy up and make beautiful in the paper. But for right now, you want to go ahead and try to get it in there. So let's now go back to our steps again. So step 4, okay, so I've gone through all of my studies. My outline is now full of content. I can go back and see maybe what content I'm missing. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to go back and I want to fill in any sections of this outline that, that aren't filled in. At the end, this outline template should be all of your text. It should have none of my text. Those are just kind of instructions and guidance. And so you want to go back, fill everything in, and then try to increase the organization of your outline, okay? So let's go back to this template real quick. I can show you a couple more parts of this introduction that are going to be important. So here you're just kind of putting in introductory information, you know, whatever you find. It often for this very beginning to help really introduce your broad topic and to grasp the reader's attention, right? You don't want the first sentence to be a definition of something. No one's going to want to read 5 more pages of that if it starts with a definition, but really just want to give an overall introduction to your topic. And sometimes you can go outside of an empirical article and find that somewhere else that's credible online. So, you know, here maybe I can say Center for and then okay, so I can kind of have this like introductory fact. It's like, oh, okay, this is the problem introducing this topic. It doesn't have to be from an empirical article. You definitely want to get it from somewhere credible, but you can go on and like get statistics from federal agencies online, or, you know, the American Psychological Association, and kind of just briefly introduce your topic, whether it's, you know, depression or some other type of disorder, some type of treatment, some type of population. You know, if you're talking about schizophrenia, you might want to have a statistic here about how many people in the US or in the world are currently suffering from schizophrenia, something like that. So you can go outside of your empirical articles to get some of this general introductory information. And then I would want to go more specifically into my specific topic. And so I've just talked about mindset here. And then since my paper is on mindset in elementary school children, I need to narrow down and introduce my specific subtopic. Okay, so let's say I just pulled that from an article or from some credible website that I found. And I can cite that too. And so I've kind of introduced the general topic, gone down to my specific topic, And then I would start talking about some of these definitions that people might need to know, right? Most people don't really know what a mindset is. And so unless I describe it before I really jump into telling people about it, they're going to have no idea of what I'm talking about, okay? And so all of that stuff needs to be introduced in the beginning. Then at the end of the introduction, you need to convey, if it's not already apparent, why your study is important and why someone should take the 10 or 20 minutes to read your paper. Why does anyone care about this topic? And so you can get this from a credible website, or I would guarantee you that almost every one of your articles has this in the introduction. Okay, so I'm just making this up, but you kind of get the idea. It's like, why do I want to read this paper? Why is it important to look at this problem? Okay, I'm going to get rid of this. And then the purpose of your paper. And so the purpose of everyone's paper is, half of the purpose is always going to be the same. The purpose of your paper is to review research, okay? And so so it doesn't have to sound exactly like this. There's a number of different ways we can word this, but what is the purpose of your paper? Your paper is a literature review, and so the purpose of it is to review all of the empirical literature or the empirical studies So the purpose of this review is to provide an overview of the empirical literature on mindset and elementary school learning. Okay, again, just making this up as I go. So I have the purpose. Then the next thing that I specifically am going to require you to do is a brief preview of your paper. And BIM talked about this in the 1995 article that I had you all read. But what this does is it just says, this paper is going to do this. To do that, first you're going to read about X, then you're going to read about Y, and then finally we'll finish up by you reading about Z. This provides some context and kind of a cognitive map for your reader. So your reader knows what they're going to read about, they know what to expect, and that helps increase coherency, okay? You don't, and so I've outlined this for you. So let's do it like this. To start, like, to accomplish and then you can go into all of your subsections. And so essentially you're just walking them through the bolded headers of your paper. I will first review studies that measure the effects of mindfulness priming, or I'm sorry, mindset on you can say I in the beginning and the end of this paper. You are the author, after all. You don't want to put in any opinions or any of your own personal knowledge into here. This is a review of the literature, and at this point, you're not an expert in it yet. And so you can discuss yourself in the first person if you want, beginning at the end, because you are the one writing it. You are the one drawing conclusions, but you want to keep all of your personal beliefs and knowledge out of it. Second, I will Okay, if I had a third supporting section, I would want to outline that too, but in my example, I don't. And then finally, your last section, right? So you'll see that I'm outlining the headers here. Okay, so first, you're going to read about this. Second, you're going to read about this. And finally, you're going to read about my conclusion, okay? Finally, I will provide conclusions. Okay, and so that's kind of the general idea. And then this turns into a really short paragraph at the very end of your introduction that just gives your readers some context and a brief preview of what's to come to increase coherency. Okay, so really I've got this whole first section filled out. We're about done with this process. Let's go back. So I've done all of this. Once the outline is full of info, I want to polish up organization if necessary, which at some level it is always going to be necessary. You want to use different levels for outline formatting, as we do here. And those levels should be consistent if possible. And again, we can work on that in the revision, but you need to try to parse information apart into levels. And I'll give you an example in just 1 second. I also want to make it really clear that you should use the outlining button essentially in Microsoft Word. Do not manually tab stuff. What it's going to do is it messes up it's going to try to automatic format, and then you're going to be doing manual formatting, and it's going to get all jumbled up, and it makes it really, really, really hard to edit or fix later on. And so I'll just show you this button really quick that I'm talking about. And so instead of, let me find an example. Okay, so here's the article that I put in here. Say I want to break apart this methods information here, okay? And so this detail about what the teachers were doing, I want to make into a smaller level because it's just a more specific detail, okay? So instead of pressing tab, which may work for you, but it's going to start changing the type of outlining that you're using, you want to make sure to go up here and press the tab up here. It looks like it did the same thing, and sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. And so you need to use this tab up here. If you use the template here, I've already got a certain outlining format set up, and so it should do a lot for you. But you do not want to start like using your own bullets. You just want to tab in every time, either in or down, or tab in. In or down when you need a new line, or tab in when you want to increase the indent or the level. I'm sorry, not tab in, this button in. You'll see that now that I've clicked, if you notice that, since I clicked that bullet the first time, it starts changing everything else. And so don't mess with it. Just tab increase indent here without doing anything manually. And so you can start to parse apart some of this information. I've already ruined the outline format by doing this. It's okay if they're bullets, okay, but it just needs to be consistent so not everything is something different throughout the paper. And so if we go and look at, you'll see that in the examples that are up, not everyone's outline looks the same, and that's fine. Some are broken apart into levels more than others. Again, that's okay. If we look at this example right here, we'll see that the indents and the levels that are going on are a little bit different, but the important part is that they've tried to separate it. They have the bolded sections, and they have all of the content here. So one last thing we're going to look at before I turn this video off is the rubric one more time. So after you've done all this, and you think you've done everything, you just want to go back and check everything off in the rubric to make sure that you're not forgetting anything. And this rubric lines up very well with the template that I have set up. And so I walked you through introducing the introduction section of your outline. You want some general introduction to your topics worth a point. You want to narrow it down to your specific topic for another point. You need to define any psychological terms that readers will need to know to understand your paper. Again, anything like a third or fourth or fifth grader wouldn't know how to define on their own, you need to define and describe in the paper. Only if it's relevant to your paper. If they need to know that word to understand what's to come next. And then stating the little preview that I walked you through. Here you need to have the supporting sections with 6 or more of your articles, only presenting the findings that are relevant. You need to have your conclusion, so try to provide some general conclusions or takeaways, and then again, borrow some suggestions for future research and cite them in that conclusion section. You want to use an outline format, so not just bullets of information. It needs to be broken apart into levels. However possible, everything needs to include an in-text citation. And then also, this organization needs to be based upon the subtopics that we came up with. And so the most important part here is getting those bolded level 1 headers, the introduction, subtopic 1, subtopic 2, subtopic 3, if you have it, and the conclusion. Very important. At the end of the outline, you need an APA style reference list. And that's just so I can see what your 6 articles are and make sure that we can find them in that outline. If you insert another site, another source in there that you used in the introduction, say like you go to the CDC to report statistics on some type of public health concern, you would want to look up the APA citation for CDC and throw it in that reference list too, so that you don't have to do it later. If you don't add any new sources, then really you can just go to your assignment 6A, copy paste your reference list to the end of this. I just need it at the end of the outline so I don't have to jump back and forth. Also, it makes it easier when we turn this into your paper. Your reference list is already there at the end. And again, every piece of information that's included is tied to an in-text citation. You're not an expert on this. You might know some stuff about this. You might be able to write about your topic a little bit without having to look at the article, but that doesn't mean that you should. If you want to say something, then you need to find an expert or a credible source that said it and cite them. And so sometimes that happens. I say, I need to say this, so I have to go and find someone that said it and published it and cite them for it. Because again, at this level, we're not experts on this topic yet. We are presenting knowledge from experts to a wide audience. And so anything you want to say needs to be cited. So that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully that explanation helped shed some light on how you should go about this outline, the best order to do things in, what I'm looking for in specific parts of this outline. And again, always remember, this is just the first go at it. We'll work extensively on it through a revision, but the important part is you want subtopics, you want to pull all the information out of your articles, and you want to organize it as best as you can on your first go around.